Hey, this is Zach Log the Great. Due to some unfortunate circumstances, which I am not going to go into detail about, I will not be doing a video recording tonight. But I am getting together with my friend Chris,
Hello.
and we are joined tonight by the illustrious Harry Seldon.
Good evening.
And we're getting together tonight to talk about Jim Butcher's book, recent book, Battleground. I do have to mention it's kind of funny because just a couple of nights ago I was talking with Jeffro Johnson, and I think he would hold all of us in just a little bit of scorn for reading and discussing a book that was published in the last 70 years.
There's wisdom in that. I can't say I disagree.
Okay. For any of those listening, I will warn you: this is not a review. This is a discussion of the book, and if you have not read it yet, there will be spoilers everywhere. Okay,
not just for this book, probably every other book in the series as well.
Yes,
because everything ties into everything else.
Yes, and so there's so if you have not yet read Jim Butcher's Battleground, I would encourage you to read it first and then come back for the talk. Having said that, I have to say first off, congratulations, Harry, on correctly predicting Justine's predicament.
It was the line from Small Favor, talking about listening to the first words that come out of your mouth when you woke up. Something in there. It seemed like Butcher wouldn't have written it the way he did if it was just a matter of save Justine. The fact that it was just one word really got me suspicious. I mean, I didn't see the specifics coming though. The whole outsider possession, that no idea.
Yes, and so it's also interesting because let's see. We have now seen all three of the walkers at some point in the series. Because there was He Who Walks Behind, who was who Justin DeMorn set upon Harry when Harry was a teenager, and Harry managed to drive off, defeat. There is He Who Walks Before, who showed up in Cold Days. He was also known as Sharkface, if that reminds you who that was. And now we have He Who Walks Beside, who has apparently been a part of the story for some time, just previously known as Nemesis.
So is He Who Walks Beside, is he Nemesis, or is Nemesis still the overarching threat, and he's just one small part of it? Because we've seen people possessed by Nemesis before. We saw Cat Sith and a couple other of the Fae. We know that Leia was infected and Mab managed to drive it out of her. So is Nemesis He Who Walks Beside, or I think it's just one more soldier in that fight, if that makes sense.
So the question that I had in mind, that's kind of the same thing, is because I had taken it to be that Nemesis simply was He Who Walks Beside. And then, well, here, let me see if I can find where that's relatively late in the book. Geez.
Yeah, it will do you no good once I've caved in your skull. Nemesis am I called. But I don't know. Unfortunately, that to me that seemed more along the lines of if I were in if early series Harry was doing something for the White Council and introduced himself as the White Council, or as the representative of the White Council. That's the sense I got from it. But
yeah, so I had, like I was saying, I had taken it to be that he who walks beside was Nemesis, but then the question that occurred to me at that was, if that's the case, is Nemesis limited to, controlling one person, or can Nemesis effectively like manipulate several people at once? Because I had the impression from earlier in the series that there was more than one person who had, fallen to this thing.
yes, I mean, back at the very beginning when they first started talking about the Black Council and Nemesis, um, they were saying that even as far back as the FBI agents who were turning into werewolves, that weird things were happening and violations of the normal laws of magic and entities acting, you know, differently than they normally do. And that seemed to suggest, if not outright possession, then at least widespread influence. But I don't know. TV Tropes agrees with you.
That he
That
who walks.
Nemesis is he who walks beside. But that's weird that it's weird in that case that the other two were beaten comparatively easily. In that it was possible for a single person to even fight it. I don't know.
There's a couple things with that. Let's see. Number one, Harry is, a Starborn, which
That's
we
true.
still don't really know what that means.
Although that is suddenly not as special as it seemed earlier.
Well, I
Yes,
mean,
but some of the other one, I mean, the fact that Dracul is another one, he's not exactly a bit player himself, you know.
No, but now you've got Starborns running all over the place.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I think we have four, right? We have Harry, we have Dracul. It's mentioned that Elaine, because Harry and Elaine were said to be extremely close in age, just to start with, and then Listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait,
So that is. Well, that's starting to get to be a decent crowd.
Who was the fourth one? I didn't catch the name.
Listen, the turtleneck guy, the guy working for, and then who ended up betraying Ethnia.
Okay. Well, no, he didn't. I don't think, or that was her. That was her ranting. I think she had misunderstood.
Right. I think she was just looking for a reason why she failed, and that was the only thing she can think of.
Yeah, that could be.
Okay. Well, because she said that when Harry realized that they hadn't actually killed the Carpenter family.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord, we're doing this from the back. We're doing this from the back to the front.
But there was a lot of stuff that happened in the back of this book.
Yes, well, that was actually one of the big points I had in mind. Like, I don't think they did this in the first, like, 4 books so much, but in the more recent Harry Dresden books, there's typically, like, the big climax, and then there's a significant chunk of the book, another, like, 50 pages or so, of kind of wrapping up material.
Yeah, you've got the climax and the not epilogue, but the denouement.
Yeah, and the wrapping up material of this one is pretty packed.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of that is this book is setting up a new status quo, because really from book 1 to about changes, you had a bunch of things that were basically the same from book to book. Things got bigger in scale, but it was basically the same sort of relationships and everything. And then from changes up until like most of this book, it's been something different every time. First Harry's a ghost, then he's learning how to be the the Winter Night, and then it's a heist, and then it's the stuff from peace talks. Whereas now I feel like it's like, okay, this is how everything's going to be set up going forward. They've sort of reached a sort of stable relationship between all the different powers. So I think from now on, we'll see that be the new normal and just acting within that.
Well, so the comparison that changes, I was actually thinking about that also in a slightly different light, because, like, okay, in the book, in Changes, like, almost everything gets taken away from Harry. His office gets blown up, his apartment building gets destroyed, his car gets smashed, and excuse me, and so then in this one, it's kind of a similar thing, except it's not material possessions. It's kind of his relationships.
Right. His relationship with the White Council, such that it is basically gone. His obviously Murphy, that's not there anymore. It's not quite the same thing though, because he still has, he still knows the Knights, he still knows the Alphas, he still knows Mac even. So I don't know if it's, and they both also have a little scene I liked with where right near the end he remembers the death curse that was put on him, die alone, and is portrayed as just a whisper in the back of his head in both cases. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, it's well, and also his let's see, the White Council and Murphy, and also his grandfather, even.
Yes.
He was quite upset that Harry was friends with a White Court vampire, and then finding out that that was his his grandson. So
I saw a comment that I think sums it up nicely. Somebody said, "I'm wondering what mountain range is going to get leveled when news that Harry is engaged to a White Court vampire makes it to McCoy." And the response was, "They'll know he received the Save the Date card when the Missouri Basin suffers from a massive earthquake that leaves geologists baffled. It's like an RSVP."
Now, one thing with his relationship to the White Council, though, that has already been on shaky ground for a while. So this is the first point where everyone actually knows where they stand.
It was on shaky ground even from book 1.
Right. But they had given him, the responsibility of being a warden. And up until he accepted the mantle of Winter Night, it seemed like things were actually going okay for him, like at least the surface level, not counting the Black Council, Gray Council stuff.
Right.
But as far as most people were concerned on the White Council, they're like, well, Harry Dresden is one of us. And since Changes, it's been all over the place. So some people love him, some people can't stand him, some people just don't know what to make of him. Whereas now, that relationship is clearly defined.
So we're actually getting pretty wrapped up in details, and I was hoping, and this is my fault, I should have I should guide this a little better since it's my show. I was hoping we could start off with a kind of big picture look at this, overall impressions, and I'll start off with like the first thing I thought when I was a good way into this book is this actually feels like a description of a part of a real war. Like it doesn't. He's not taking it lightly, and he's not like sugarcoating it.
The scene where he's counting how many people he has under his command, under his banner, and the number keeps going down every paragraph. I thought that those chapters were phenomenal war writing, completely independent of the magic and everything.
Well, that was. Go ahead, Chris.
So I have read some more of Jim Butcher's works, the Furies of Calderon, that whole series, and he is very good at describing large battles where you still have a sense of what's going on. I'm actually glad that he found a way to bring that into this series. But yeah, that's just something he is very skilled at.
I do also find it interesting that 2020 was when Jim Butcher decided to publish a book that sees urban combat in the United States against forces which wish to tear down everything we have built and care about.
Yeah, the timing could have been a little better.
I don't know. Was it too good timing?
So going back to his sort of bannerman. So yeah, it's gut wrenching just seeing that number drop, and just like him recognizing, hey, these are individual human beings following me that are losing their lives.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, these are people who the vast majority of them have absolutely no training. They're just thrown into this without warning, and they're making a significant impact on the supernatural forces they're opposing. So that really drives home why the supernatural forces need the whole masquerade to be going on. Because whenever the real military shows up, it's over for them. It doesn't matter how powerful they are. Once the mortals figure out you're a threat and they go after you, they're gonna get you.
Well, I will say, by the time the choppers, the U.S. military choppers arrive, Ethne was down. If she had still been kicking at that point, I think that may have gone differently.
It would have gone differently with the choppers that they sent, but we've seen that nuclear bombs work on supernatural entities.
Yes.
I'm not saying they would have nuked Chicago yet, but give it another week, give Ethne more time and make her an even bigger threat, have her keep using the Eye of Baelor and everything, and that might have been an option that they would start considering.
Well, and the entire plan for the good guys was, let's just throw stuff at her until something sticks, until she's vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a full-scale military just throwing everything they have at her, that's gonna work eventually. Especially when it just took once she was weak, a kick to the head to get rid of the Eye of Baelor. A tomahawk missile or something, that could be a good kick to the head.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see. What was there's actually a poem I recorded on this channel some time ago. I'm not sure if you covered it with me, Chris. No, I don't think you did. But it was this book called it to mind at several points. It's by Edmund Vance Cook. It's called "How Did You Die?" And this book reminded me of that several times. Basically, to do the horrible thing of of extracting the message from a poem. Basically, it's we're all going to die someday. So the choice is, your only choice is, how did you do it? Did you do it honorably, fighting for something that matters, or did you crawl into a corner and just die as a coward? And so like that one kind of came to mind several times as well. But the war Harry's war banner. One interesting thing about that, in terms of what would you call it? In terms of planning his writing, um, I'm guessing the reason that Jim Butcher did that is so that he had a way of just running through those numbers without it being weird and intrusive all the time. Like, I don't know how else Harry would get that kind of feedback on all these people around him. And it lets it does let you feel, that kind of, what actually happens in a war. A lot of people die.
Yeah,
It
and
was
I think
Go
he
for it.
had that sort of ready to go with the whole genius loci concept, because it's been described as having a similar amount of accuracy and attention to detail.
Yes, the very first time he went to Demon Reach and he got the Intellectus there, he counted similar numbers of trees and other features on the island instantaneously. So it both felt like something that fit within the existing universe. The fact that these numbers kept popping up in his head, it didn't take me out of the story at all. It fit perfectly in, and at the same time, it made it better from a war writing perspective.
Right. And oh, sorry, you can go.
That constant perspective.
Yeah, and we also know from the one short story where we follow Molly as the new Winter Lady, how the ladies do feel a bit of what their followers feel. So that sort of thing where he feels their pain, that's already in that universe as well.
Mm-hmm. In the Winter Court, no less.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that was him intentionally setting up beforehand and how much of it is just realizing he had that in his toolkit, but it came together very nicely.
Yeah, that I think was one of the three highlights for me for the book. I'd say you were asking Zach Log about overall impressions. I'd say this book had a very different feel than the previous one, which was odd because in one sense it felt like narratively they were two parts of the same book that they could have been released together, but it felt like they were written years apart or in subtly different genres, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like more chapters of Peace Talks. It felt like a completely different book.
Yeah, I mean, the focus, well, because the focus of Peace Talks is basically, small scale and personal.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or at least right up until the last, 100 pages. I don't, since I don't have a paper copy, I don't know how many actual pages, but, relatively near the end, then suddenly, something quite significant changes. The but yeah, from the very start of this one, the focus of this one is there's a huge problem for an enormous number of people, and it does have a very different kind of feel. It's not quite as drastic, but it's a little bit of the same it feels a little bit like the what is it? Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game to Speaker for the Dead. Speaker for the Dead is a sequel to Ender's Game. It's a completely different kind of book.
Right, exactly. I mean, not to the same degree, obviously, but that same sort of difference.
So Peace Talk to Battleground, what I actually thought of was the movie Hot Fuzz, where the first half of the movie, the focus is on comedy and plot, but then you get to the point where there's going to be this huge, ridiculous, fight scene that spans the entire town. and the humor's still there, but you get this big shift. And that's sort of what I was thinking of, because yes, this is, the same characters, the same situation that was set up, but now all the pieces are in place and you just go crazy with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on a side note, I will say that Hot Fuzz is one of the best movies I think I've ever seen. It does the very difficult job of being very funny and serious at the funny and serious at the same time.
It's a parody of a genre while fitting within the genre.
Yeah, and so anyway, but we're not
Like Galaxy Quest.
Yes.
I'll have to check it out. I've never watched or even really heard of Hot Fuzz. I've heard the name, but I don't know nothing about it.
Yeah, Edgar Wright is just a great director.
Oh, okay. Then I definitely have to watch it.
Yeah, Oh, go ahead, Chris.
But it was just that sort of that shift in perspective where it's like, okay, now everything's in place. Let's just get on with it, because there is that big shift where I think I'd even mentioned this in a private conversation, but usually whenever I read a book, especially a Dresden Files book, like I can just sit down and just read through the whole thing in one sitting if I have the time. That's no problem. This one, there was just so much stuff going on, and it was like one horrible thing after another, that I would read a little bit and then I would have to put it to the side for a bit and do something else and then go back to it.
So let's see. Other large scale things. I think it's kind of interesting in this one. I feel like this is the first time we see this is what the Winter Knight actually his real job is. Like everything else is like little errands around the side, but then this is actually what his main purpose is. It just doesn't have to. He just doesn't have to do it very often.
And it explains some things about Mab's behavior, because I know I've wondered early on. Mab has spent so many books grooming Harry to be the Winter Knight and setting it all up and keeping him as the Winter Knight and dealing with his snide comments and everything. And one wonders, why bother? What's the point? And this was the point. Years of effort were worth it to have somebody who can perform like this for one night.
Well, let's see.
Yeah, you can't see Lloyd Slate doing a very good job of that.
No, you can see Lloyd Slate doing some of the small errands, the hitman jobs that Harry's been tasked with, but you can't see Lloyd Slate doing this.
Well, now he would be able to fight adequately, but the thing is, the leading an army, is the part where he would pretty obviously fail.
Mm-hmm.
So since we just brought her up, and especially her relationship to Harry, and I'm kind of jumping to detail again, but there's okay. It seems pretty obvious to me that the most talked about thing in this book is going to be the death of Karen Murphy.
Definitely.
And I was just talking to my wife a little earlier about this, and I was wondering whether she had any thoughts that she would like me to throw in, because she would not there's not enough money I could pay her to appear on something like this. I am the showman of the family, but she did have one thought about that, which is, considering how this book ends, she wonders if it's possible that Mab was influencing Rudolph, and Mab got Karen Murphy killed.
I didn't even occur to me why Mab influencing Rudolph? Why would Mab want that?
How does the book end?
Just to set up the marriage.
Huh.
I don't think Mab is above setting something up like that. I just, in the given situation, I don't necessarily see it.
It seems it's not that she would. It's not that she wouldn't be mentally able to kill Mab if the situation called for it. It's that I don't see her doing it so secretively.
Well, see, that's not the thing that gets me. Because I mean, secret maneuvering and is like half is enormous part of what they do. The thing for me is that like Mab would have to know that if she did that and Harry ever found out, like they're
Yeah, it's over. Harry will figure out a way, no matter what, a way to get revenge or die trying.
and it's
there's no two ways around it. It seems far too risky.
Yeah, and so it's like give me a second. Well, and not only that, like his day job, so to speak, is as a detective. Like figuring out how these things add up to a bigger picture.
Well, and Mab's first meeting with him was in his detective's office. Way back in, I think, book 4.
It was in Summer Night. I actually reread that not long ago.
I feel like from a narrative perspective, they set up the trigger discipline thing so clearly that I don't have any reason to question it. If they bring in something being off about this in future books, I don't think it would feel too out of place, but I feel like with what we have, like I'm okay with just believing that, he's just has terrible trigger discipline.
And we saw that in last book that she has not mentally reacted well to her injuries at all. And this is in character. This makes a lot of sense given what we know about her from previous books, but in the last book, she held a primed grenade next to her head at one point. And that's not what mentally healthy people do. I think somehow or other she was going to end up dying that night, regardless of what happened, regardless of whether it was Rudolph or whether it was something else.
Yeah, okay. She did just help fight a giant, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll say that the soul gaze with that Harry tried to do was some fantastic writing. That was I think highlight 2 for me of the book was just that page or so of description.
Well, jumping back to Mab, for me, the big thing was his conversation with her at the end, where he realizes that, like him changing isn't going to be this like huge thing, this one thing that he has to guard against. Like it's this, process where you just have to make the decisions you make, and the cumulative effect of those will end up changing you.
Mm-hmm. Well, to sound a bit like a broken record, that reminds me of another poem I did on this channel, which is what is it? C.S. Lewis. Now I know, Chris. Yeah, you covered this one with me. C.S. Lewis's "Nearly They Stood Who Fall."
Yes.
Which is an absolutely. Every time I read it or think about it seriously, it's absolutely terrifying. Because he says, the people who, okay, actually, yeah, Chris, you took this to be, I remember you read this rather differently than me. I took it to be, basically about salvation and damnation. But like, the people who, the people who end up in, end up failing, end up, damned, you know, so many of them, were so close, could have made it, and they can look back and, from now, they can see that one little turn, which seemed so insignificant at the time, and then at that point, starts adding up, you know, the chain of events set forth by that. It's not it's not a pair of doors set before you. It's slowly veering off track until at some point you realize there's no way back from there. And Harry talking about like how basically what he has to do this night is doing to him seems to be reminds me of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's something that I think Butcher's been pretty consistent with throughout the series. That it's rarely one individual decision, it's every decision that you make.
And unfortunately, that does sort of support the White Council's view of him, because what he was guarding against, thinking he needed to do to make sure he was still him, he realizes, well, that's not what I need to be guarding against at all. And that's kind of what the White Council's position had been, or at least like Carlos, like, who is legitimately Harry's friend, at least at the beginning. And, like, he wanted to give Harry the benefit of the doubt. And I think he sort of saw things more the way that Harry comes to see it.
Well, the other thing, and this frustrates me at a few points in the book. Okay, Harry may be a good detective. He would be a terrible defense attorney. Because every time someone is talking to him about these things, like, I'm like, there's a dozen other things you could say to make your case better. And like, he's talking to his grandfather is talking to him about this, and he's like, well, and he's saying, I've done okay so far, and and I know who she is. I'm going to keep fighting to be who I am. And it's like, no, like, the thing you say, like, it seems so obvious to me, the thing you say at that point is, what choice did I have at that time? What possible choice could I have made at that time that would have come out better?
Well, one of Harry's flaws, which has shown up a few times, is he really doesn't understand how other people perceive him. Because at least for like the early part of the series, in his mind, he's winning all these big victories, but he's barely scraping by. But other people see just him destroying these major players. So whenever he's talking to somebody about himself, he doesn't realize exactly how scary he can be. And I think that's one thing at the end of the book that solidifies, like, he realizes that there's no denying it now. Everyone sees him as a major player now. He's not just, he's not just Harry. No, he's Harry who defeated and captured a Titan. Because before, like, he never wanted to think of himself as being that terrifying, except to his enemies at most. But now he's like, no, everyone sees this.
Yeah, nobody wanted to stand near him at the funeral except the Knights of the Cross, because he scares, even though his allies are now looking at him and thinking, wow, that's a lot for one person to have. In the battle sequence, I think it was somebody named Randy was basically panicking, and Harry correctly recognized that this panic could spread throughout all of his troops. And the crux of what Randy was saying was nobody can fight that. And Harry at that point had to say, I can. And use himself as that sort of symbol. And I think this book, this battle, what you're saying, and it's solidified in the end, is him coming to terms with that. And coming to terms with, yeah, he's not a normal person anymore. He can't keep acting like one.
Yeah, well, I think the character flaw is he never was a normal person, because I can't remember which book he gets called out on it in, but he was trying to say that, you know, he wasn't that powerful, he wasn't that good, and somebody's straight up like, oh no, you defeated this person, you destroyed these people, you took care of this guy, and he's like, yeah, but I was just barely scraping by. And they're like, yeah, no one else sees that. They just see you taking out major players left and right.
I think I'm pretty sure that was Will talking to him. Or maybe...
that conversation happened twice. Once was Will, and once was him remembering the conversation when he was standing on Demon Reach, about a hair's breadth from fighting half the senior council. And he noted that the wardens hesitated, and he thought, well, that's silly. I could maybe take on 2 of them, but there's 10 wardens. There's no way I win that fight. And then he remembered what Will told him and thought, oh, none of them want to go first.
Right. Now everyone understands where they stand. Mm-hmm. Now he's willing to take ownership of that, in part because he has to.
So, in terms of like, to return to big picture for a moment, the last big thing I can recall, because like I told you guys earlier, I misplaced my notebook in which I had a few things written down. The last big picture thing I can recall is, like, this series is like very female dominated, and it's starting to the point where now it's actually starting to get on my nerves a little bit. I'd noticed it once in a while before, but like okay, there's let's see, there's, you know, the queens of the fairies. In the Shakespeare story, there's kings too. We've never once seen them, I'm pretty sure. There's the White Court is being run by Lara, which I kind of understand that. And, you know, then this, you know, major new player comes in and starts, you know, kicking everybody's butt, and it's Ethniu, who's also a woman, and I'm like, yeah, I find that a little bit annoying, but I don't know.
Although another one of Harry's flaws, which is you know, from the very first book, is that he can't resist a damsel in distress. Women have been his weakness.
I was quite glad that certain elements of the descriptions in the previous book were toned down for this one. Harry wasn't, I think, nearly so distracted in this book as he was in Peace Talks, so that was nice.
Well, the other thing with that is most of this book, Lara is relatively minor, whereas in the previous book, like in Peace Talks, she was a major player through like half of the book. So
that's true.
And for going forward, I think it kind of puts into context him being distracted in the last book, because you get this sense when Lara is around, he has to struggle to think straight. And now she's going to be around a lot. He's going to have to learn how to deal with that.
As long as as long as the narration, I mean, we see him struggle with the rage that the winter mantle puts on him. As long as we see him explicitly struggle with that and the narration address that this is what's happening, I think I'll be okay with it. My issue with Peace Talks was it wasn't, it didn't seem to be portrayed that way. It seemed to just be there, and that took me kind of out of the book. But I was glad that it wasn't nearly so bad in this one.
Right, and it also wasn't just him in the last book, because you also have the issue with Butters, which was not addressed here at all.
Yeah, the Butters thing, that was what really took me out of it. That felt odd. It didn't feel like it fit at all.
Yeah, like I said in the last one, I was hoping that that was going to be the stepping stone for some sort of character development with him, and it might still be, but we didn't see it in this book.
So let's see. Give me a second. So talking about Lara and things with her. Okay, so in Peace Talks, he set up this illusion of him and Lara getting busy as a cover for why they were away actually rescuing Thomas, which then has come back to haunt him a few times, and it's kind of funny because they when give me a second. When they finally reach the docks, I think this is still in chapter 1 of this book, and what is it? And Molly and Lara are both there, and Molly is being borderline rude to Lara. And then Harry's looking back and forth like, what is going on? And he has no idea. I'm like, how are you missing this? I don't.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody could miss that between Harry and Lara for any degree of time, really. But we're riding along in Harry's head, so we sort of get a biased viewpoint for everything.
But what was so did either of you have any other big overall points you wanted to cover on this one?
Nothing about the entire book. I think we more or less covered it.
Right. I have one thing, so sort of going back to things set up in the last book and then going into this one. We saw the conjuritis again, but we still didn't get much of an explanation about it.
Right. My theory is still that he caught it from Maggie, and that Maggie is a wizard as well.
Okay. So, if that's all the big overall points, let's see.
Oh, actually, I did have one more overall point. When Harry says that something is impossible, never trust him. Because he's had that before where he'll describe something as impossible in one book, and then he'll do it in the next. But here, he described a specific scenario as impossible in one chapter, and then later on, he managed to pull it off anyway. And I think that Harry in the narration just being modest, but never believe him when he says that something categorically can't be done.
Which is that, by the way? Because I don't remember what that is.
So he described the idea of fighting Ethniu in a battle of wills as flat out impossible. When Ethniu was fighting Mab for the first time. And then a few chapters later, he managed to actually do it. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because it's something that's been happening throughout the series, but I don't think ever in the same book before.
So the way I had understood their plan was the whole point of the Alliance fighting her was to
was to wear her down.
Was to wear her down so he could match roles with her.
Mm-hmm.
So, I understood that was part of the plan. Where,
Oh, I'm not complaining. It's just I found it amusing. That's all.
Well,
right.
and
So
also,
at full strength, he wouldn't have stood a chance.
well, and also another point with that is, like the final testing point on that, um, where he actually, pulls through is, and kind of finishes the job, is when he realizes, that she had already failed at something else. Or not she personally, but like her side, because the final testing point of that, she shows him the apparent death of the Carpenters and Maggie, and then he realizes, wait, no, this didn't happen. This was an illusion.
You forgot the dog.
Yeah, and you failed, and and there's a couple points in that. One is something that has been through this series a good bit, which is like Harry doesn't like Harry's real strength isn't just in himself, it's in all the people he gathers around him. And and also just like kind of going back to how did you die? It's also like what's worth fighting for, what's worth dying for, and if you don't have something that's worth dying for, are you actually alive? And he said, and he finds out that he does have something that's worth fighting. He has that something that's worth fighting for. But and to get back to what I was saying earlier, he realized in that moment she failed at that, because she didn't understand the full picture, and because he knows she failed at that, he knows she can fail, and it's possible for him to succeed. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it. Knowing that your opponent isn't literally perfect is a good starting point. If you're
Okay.
Go for it, Chris.
Oh, so sorry, this just hit me. So I agree, but I think y'all's perspective is wrong. I think the important thing is not Harry realizing that she could be beaten. I think it's her realizing that she's been beaten. That weakens her will enough where he has the chance. I think it's more her realize, because she's the one that's grasping for an explanation. Well, Listen must have betrayed me. Like, she's the one trying to figure out where she went wrong. I think that was the key there.
Yeah, that's fair too. I will also say I also find that that moment and that kind of thing pretty interesting, because there's still the contrast with almost the entire rest of the series and several of the stories in brief cases, where in like several of the stories in brief cases, the whole it basically a big part of the story is sometimes you've got to do it on your own. And it really stands to me, that stands in contrast to much of the rest of the series. But go ahead.
No, I'm just sorry.
Well, the two things, they're not directly opposed, because even if you're in a group, each individual has to be able to take care of themselves to a large degree. You have to be able to trust that the other people are going to be able to do what they need to do. So usually I think whenever they're on their own, they're also thinking of the people that they have to protect. So you have to be able to take care of yourself, but also having your allies is a big thing, because there are some things you cannot do alone. But it did strike me that that's another reason why Harry was such a great choice for Mab, because you don't just get Harry, you get a lot of very powerful people that are pretty much always going to be on his side.
There's so like I said earlier, the obviously the most talked about point of this book is the death of Karen Murphy. So I was going to come back to that. There's a couple things. For one thing, okay, assuming that Mab didn't maneuver this into place, which that's a possibility, but that's not yet that's not yet in evidence, I would say. Assuming that, her death actually a little bit reminds me. I don't know if either of you have watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes.
I have not.
Okay, but her death actually reminds me a little bit of the death of Buffy's mother in that series, because like there's Buffy ends up fighting vampires, obviously, demons and monsters of all different sorts, and then in the one season, her mother she comes home and finds her mother um, dead on the couch of like an aneurysm or something. And like there's this big it's this it's an interesting moment in the story, because it's like, there's all this supernatural stuff going on. There's all these big powerful creatures, and at the same time there's just ordinary stupid life, and and ordinary things that can come in and do so much, even apart from all that. And like, again, assuming this was not Mab, like basically it was just some idiot who should never have had a gun. Karen Murphy had just killed a 20-foot tall giant, and then some twitchy idiot who shouldn't have had a gun ends up killing her.
Right,
And
such
it's
a
just
mundane thing compared to the
right.
epic battles going on in the rest of the book.
Right, and even more direct parallel with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's one of the later seasons where, after having faced off so many supernatural threats, just some normal guy with a gun kills, I think her name's Tara, Willow's girlfriend, and then she sort of goes crazy with supernatural revenge for a bit.
I will say something that I think might not make me terribly popular, because I tend to say those things. Okay, Harry almost immediately decides to kill Rudolph. Or it's also interesting. He almost there. Oh, where is that? Let me see if I can find that spot. I think I noted it. He and at one point he's like he thinks about kind of cracking a joke about this. Oh, there it is. Okay. I didn't feel like conversation at that moment. Besides, why waste breath on a corpse? Like Harry Dresden is not like making a joke. And it's like I put a note on that. Out of character is serious business.
Well, part of what we see is that if you turn evil, you're still you. If Harry Dresden were to turn evil, if he were to give in to something like this, he's still him. That sort of wisecracking doesn't go away just because he's evil. I thought that was perfectly in character for him to, like, even in the depths of rage, to to talk like that, because that's how Harry Dresden talks.
Right, but he didn't. Like, he wasn't making any jokes. He basically, like, inner monologue. He's like, why talk? There's nothing to say here. I'm just gonna kill him.
I think that's in itself is a joke. He's just not saying it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also earlier in the book, whenever he's sort of telling Murphy what's going on, she remarks that she knows how serious it is because he's not making jokes. So I think, like, again, out of character, serious business. But I feel like that was sort of established for the book as a whole.
But so like I said, something not terribly popular. I'm not 100% sure Harry was wrong in the moment when he's like, okay, I'm gonna kill Rudolph right now. Because the reason I'm saying that is like, is Rudolph going to be like, is there going to be like a trial? Is he going to get like justice through a legal system?
Oh, there's no body now, and this all happened whenever supposedly everyone was hallucinating, right? So
Yeah.
Murphy is one of 60,000 casualties. They're not going to. I mean, even Harry notes, given the chaos, what's one more body? There's no way. There's no way there's going to be a legal trial for this.
Yeah, and go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I think that's why it's so important that it was the Knights of the Cross that were around him, because I think just about anyone else, even if they were a good person, would sort of understand that, Harry needs this or something like that. I think they would be willing to watch it happen or allow it to happen. So I think you had to have the two characters whose like their pretty much role is to make sure people stay as good as possible. Like they have to see the best in people. So I think it took them to realize that if Harry does this, it will be that sort of like change that just pushes him over the edge. And even then, it took actually direct contact with the sword to snap him back.
I will say one other thing in terms of like payoffs from previous books around that it was I thought it was pretty appropriate that the first person to come to get there was Sonya. Do you know why I'm referencing this?
Because Sonya was he had one of the coins, right?
Well, okay, there's that, but that was well, okay, yeah, that too. Um, in Chris, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think so.
Okay, so in changes, when Harry becomes the Winter Knight, and Sonya is talking with him about this shortly after, um, and Harry basically says, if I do someday become, if she does get me and I do someday become a monster, and Sonya says, then I will be there to stop you.
That was Michael. It was a car ride with Michael Carpenter. I remember that scene quite well. Harry describes Michael as having this sort of Old Testament look to him when he said that. Even though Michael wasn't trying to be intimidating, it just Harry felt that this was something that was absolute.
Oh, Chris, do you know what I'm talking about? Am I this wrong?
But he did talk to Sonya about it.
But
Sonya recommended how to deal with something like that. How to deal with the changes. He's Russian. The first thing he recommended was drinking, but after that he had actually good advice. But the threat was something different. The threat was with Michael.
Huh. Okay.
Well, I do think it is worth pointing out that the sword did hurt Harry.
Yes.
Because just the previous book, they established that it will not hurt an ordinary, mortal human.
Was my third highlight for the book. My third out of my three favorite parts was this description of Butters swinging the sword and it hitting both bad people and good, and how when it's hitting somebody who's bad, it's just cutting through them. But when it's hitting an ally, it's clearing the grime away from the eyes and the mouth. It's clearing the fear away from the mind.
Yes.
And
I thought that was just I thought that was really cool.
Well, and the other thing regarding the two knights, and this is I kind of feel like I should go back through the series and see if I can see this. This is the first time I've seen it quite so explicitly, but like, I can definitely see. Okay, there's what is it? Amarachius, Esperocius, and Fidelocius. Um, I got it out of order now, but love, faith, and hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually see, the two who were involved here. You see Sonya being hope. Like he is like every time there's this there's this slide into despair. Sonya is the one pulling people out of it. And there's you know faith, in terms of faith, Butters is the one. Basically, I believe in you. I know you. I know who you are, and I believe we can fight. I believe this is a fight that's worth doing. And it's interesting seeing them them in those roles.
Huh.
Yeah.
I never saw that, but you're totally right.
And then the kind of interesting point with that is, what is the significance, the allegorical significance of the third one being out of action in different parts of this story? Which I don't have an answer. That's a question.
I'd be surprised if we didn't find out. Butcher is pretty good about that kind of detail.
Well, and especially because now that I'm thinking about it, the quote from the New Testament, which explicitly talks about them.
The greatest is love.
These three remain: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. So, yeah. Okay. Let's see. What else? I don't know. Did one of you want to pull up something?
So I noted something very small. Way back when we first meet the Winter Mother, and I can't remember. I don't think it was Changes, but I don't remember which book it was. But
it was no, that was in Summer Night.
That was still in Summer Night.
He wants to talk to all six of them.
Right. In Summer Night, when we see the cottage, it's mentioned that Mother Winter doesn't get around much anymore, in large part because she lost her walking staff. And I think that walking stick that she lost is the black staff that Ebenezer has been wielding for the past 300 years. And I'd seen that theory years ago, and I thought, oh, that'd be kind of neat. But here, when he used it in sort of its maximum potential, his shadow changed to the shadow of an old crone. And I thought that was basically confirmation. Tiny little detail, blink and you miss it, but I thought that was neat.
Well, and the other thing with that is that Ethniu, when she sees him with this, she calls him like a child playing with a grown-up, a child, playing with a grown-up's tools.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if that was the case, that would fit.
Yeah. So again, very, very small, but there was something else with the Fae, and maybe they did explain this and I missed it. How is Mab so powerful at what is basically the summer solstice? Because we see in Ghost Story that being near Chicago in May, she was all emaciated almost. This strain of remaining in this kind of climate so close to the solstice was taking its toll. But here she was fine.
Well, for that point specifically, I'd say there's two things. For one, at that point she had been here she had been like in Chicago, like in the wrong realm at that time for a long time. Like it was a continuous thing. The other thing, she was also focusing all her efforts at that point on keeping Harry's body alive, which it really shouldn't be anymore.
That's true. That's true.
And at this point, all her Chris.
Oh, I was gonna say she's also amassed like all of her power, like for this, where she has all of her subordinates there supporting her. So in a sense, she's brought sort of her realm with her.
Yeah, that's also true.
So let's see. Other kind of I at this point I'm just kind of going through some interesting moments from this book for me. Go ahead, Chris.
Before that, I just thought of something with the other thing. So for the supernatural creatures, if they cross a threshold, they leave a lot of their power behind. But now Chicago's not just a random mortal place. Like, you have somebody in charge of it, Marcone, who allows her to come in. So I wonder if that means that she can bring a lot, like, her full power with her now.
That's a good.
There's a recognized there's a recognized authority, whereas before it would have just been like the mundane mortal authorities, like the governor of the state or the mayor of the city, whereas now someone can actually invite her in.
Well, and the other thing, I'd said earlier about payoffs from an earlier book, and I'm gonna have to look that up in changes, because I could swear Sonya says that to him specifically about being the Winter Knight. But anyway, but in terms of payoff from an earlier book, Marcone's leveling up at the end of Battleground. I had actually just coincidentally wasn't really planning this, but I had reread Small Favor.
And he specifically wouldn't take it in Small Favor, if I recall.
Well, okay, the end. Yeah, well, yes and no, because he didn't take the coin from Nicodemus. But the other thing is, at the end of Small Favor, Thorned Namshiel's coin goes missing, and they were actually discussing trying to figure out who had it, and did Marcone possibly take it? Yeah, it's there. And so I guess, and I was a little stuck on that too, and I guess the thing was, as it was in that book, if he had taken a coin from Nicodemus, basically he would have been working for Nicodemus. And it wasn't that he wasn't willing to take one of them, it was that he was still going to be his
working
own man.
For himself, yeah.
So
that would make sense. Because that I did note that he wouldn't take it in Small Favor. Obviously, he and Nicodemus in Skin Game, he wanted revenge and was willing to help Mab get it. Yeah, okay. If it was set up all the way back then, that puts some pieces together.
So what was also paying off a setup from our previous books for my next trick, anvils.
And now he finally does.
On a Black Court vampire. So that was Blood Rights? Was that it?
Oh wow, all the way back then.
That was also known as the one where Harry goes on a porn set. Okay. So, just to, like I said, just going through some interesting moments in the book for me. Before the actual battle gets going, Harry and his grandfather, McCoy, are talking, and his grandfather says to him, seeing you like this all the time in the worst of the crossfire, It was like this with your mother, getting more and more isolated from other wizards, getting caught up with a bad crowd, and I didn't know what the hell to do, what to say to her, either. Damn it, Hoss, you keep getting hurt, and I can't stop it. And
Well, and now now just like his mother, he's getting into a relationship with a white court vampire.
well, and
So
the other
that's
thing
not
with
going well. Go for it.
well, the other thing with that for me is like just being in the position of a parent who can't who sees something going wrong with your child and you can't figure out a thing to do about it. And like that's like just so painful. Um, like I understand how he feels there.
I'm I'm kind of impressed with Harry for not really holding it against Ebenezer for killing him in the last book. He surprisingly was able to let that grudge go surprisingly easily.
Well, and the last person to kill him too, he was okay with it.
That's true,
Well,
actually.
We still haven't seen them talk since then. I still want to know how that conversation is going to go.
Well, oh, that's a good point. He wasn't with Ivy. Normally, Kincaid's been Ivy's bodyguard, but didn't show up this time.
So does this mean he gets his money back, or?
I did wonder if he could have used a free death curse at that moment, and then been brought back, but that might be cheating.
I feel like the death curse, it's basically kind of like a suicide thing, like you're pouring your soul into it. So at that point, nothing can save you. That's sort of how I understood it.
It's to use a TV tropes term, that's casting from hit points.
Yes.
Which makes me wonder, could a wizard who is sufficiently motivated just standing there cast his death curse?
Oh, without actually dying?
Well, would that be the thing that kills him?
I think it stated at one point that it would be. I think that the death curse is called that not because you have to be on the brink of death to use it, but because it kills you to do, and so you only tend to do it when there's no other options.
Right. So I wonder if we might see something like that at some point, if it's sufficiently a sufficiently bad situation.
It could be. It would have an incredible effect given the sort of power scaling that we're dealing with at this stage in the series.
So then the question is, who would be the logical candidate to do that?
I mean, it's basically the ultimate sacrifice, where normally you would do everything within your power to fight normally, and you would have that in your back pocket. So it would have to be somebody trying to prevent something terrible before it even has the chance to happen. So narratively, I don't feel like Harry would do something like that just because he's the protagonist, and it'd be weird to set that up. But I could see Ebenezer doing something like that to protect Harry.
I could see Ebenezer or Ramirez. I'm thinking about Harry's last enemy on the White Council sacrificing himself effectively.
Yeah, Ramirez is the one that, for some reason, that that strikes me as his thing. We find what is it? So in the last book, Harry had asked Ebenezer what the stars and the stones was about. Or like Ebenezer said, stop throwing around that phrase, boy, you don't even know what it means. and Harry says, "Well, the person I learned it from never wanted to teach me." And then in this book, he overhears the Black Court talking about this. Where is that? Can one of you find that faster? We'll see who can race to that point the first.
I can't do a digital search, so I think I'm at a disadvantage.
Are you sure it's Stars and Stones? Because I know it was meant... this was never about raising an army, fool, Mavra hissed. It was about acquiring new blood for the Stars and Stones.
Yeah, and so, there's a particular meaning to that, and I don't know, kind of what that is. Sorry, here, give me a second here. And then he goes to ask Listens to Wind, and Listens to Wind is like, I'll need at least a year to get clearance to tell you anything about that. And that's while he's still on the White Council, so I don't know what good that promise is at the moment.
Now, one thing though is that they made sure to have the vote to kick Harry out while Ebenezer and Listens to Wind were in surgery and couldn't vote. So Ramirez says, if Ebenezer even tries to help him, then that would put him at odds with the White Council. So honestly, at some point, considering they have the whole Gray Council, Black Council stuff going on, I could actually see Ebenezer and Listens to Wind just siding with Harry against the White Council at some point.
Well, we saw Rashid mentioned, I think, Turncoat, that it was not Harry's time to stand against the White Council yet. But there was a strong implication that that time was coming. So I think we're going to see that pretty soon, narratively speaking. Though speaking of Stars and Stones, we did get an explanation of Empty Night, which is something else that Harry's used as sort of a swear for the whole series. And seeing that as a catchphrase for Nemesis was interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think Chris, I had heard this from Chris that what is it? That Jim Butcher is planning the last 3 books in the series to be those titles to be those words, Empty Night, Stars and Stones, and Hell's Bells. I don't know in which order.
Yeah, that was a rumor that I've seen for a long time online. I don't know how true it is. I haven't seen this from an actual interview, but a lot of people quote that that's something he said.
Which, if so, it seems pretty clear to me. It seems quite likely to me that Hell's Bells would be his final dealing with Nicodemus. I don't know what else Butcher would put that title on. But I don't know about the other 2. Well, okay, so Hell's Bells would be Nicodemus, and it's possible Empty Night might be dealing with Nemesis / He Who Walks Beside.
And Stars and Stones would be dealing with the Starborn issue, presumably.
Well, but we don't know. Okay. It was about acquiring new blood for the Stars and Stones, and Dracul is a Starborn. So yeah. Okay, I don't know.
Now, the other rumor that I had heard, supposedly where Jim Butcher is taking things, is that at some point in the series, Harry will have either broken like on like a technicality or outright broken each one of the rules of magic.
Isn't one of the rules of magic, thou shalt not open the outer gates?
Yes, also you can't like go against the stream of time.
That's going to be that. I actually that makes sense that there's going to be that they would do time travel at some point. Um, there's a few books I remember where something weird happened, and the implication was only only Harry could have done it, but Harry has no memory of doing it. Uh, I'm specifically thinking the map of Little Chicago that he made with Bob's help. And he finds out later that his original version was flawed and would have blown up the house. And somehow, in between the first time he was about to use it and got interrupted, and then the time he actually used it, somewhere in between, the flaw got fixed. And Bob has no idea how that happened, but said only Harry could have done it. But we've been with Harry the whole time, and it definitely wasn't him. So if there's time travel involved, that would explain that sort of thing.
Now this is getting, very meta here, but the books are written from, Harry's perspective, and it's called the Dresden Files. So there is the implication that these documents exist in universe from his point of view. So either he or, whoever he passes them down on to could use those to go back and, know the specific times and everything, know what to change.
Well, and we see that he's not alone in keeping this sort of diary. We know that McCoy and McCoy's mentor, and going on back to the original Merlin, kept this sort of records, including in
Right.
languages that Harry can't actually read. And McCoy mentions maybe you'll have your own books to add to this collection someday. And Harry said, "Well, I'm not much of a writer."
Yeah, I think I think there was a real implication there that the books we are reading are like are Harry's addition to that collection.
I mean, if we want to get meta, the short-lived Dresden Files RPG was explicitly an RPG that they played in universe, and it
Correct.
included characters complaining about or commenting on their own portrayals in the rulebook.
Yes. Unfortunately, my RPG group, the guy that DMs, he cannot stand that style of RPG. So there's very little chance that I'll ever actually play it.
That's fair. I've never played it myself. I don't even know if it's good or not. But this sort of thing has precedent with Butcher. Is all I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah, I've read some of it. He has notes. I think it's like Will or one of them who wrote it, and then he writes comments in the margin.
Yep. Which it is clever. I can see somebody getting. I don't get annoyed by it, but I could see somebody getting annoyed by it. Somebody who wasn't already a fan of the series. I will say, regarding the Stars and Stones, it is weird that if it's something that's that secret that Listens to Wind himself doesn't feel qualified to tell Harry about, why do they use the phrase so casually? I mean, to wizards, knowledge is power. Uh, so between that and Empty Night, it's odd that that this is a phrase that they would just throw around. But I mean, sort of like somebody in the early 1940s in high military authority throwing around the word Manhattan Project. Even if he doesn't say, "Oh, that's where we're building a nuclear bomb," it's still not something they talk about, probably.
Who do we see other than Harry using that phrase?
Well, apparently he learned it from McCoy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right, but like we don't know. Did he hear McCoy yell that once and thought it was a cool curse phrase?
Well, we've heard Bob use it, but Bob probably got it from Harry, so that doesn't really count.
Yeah, because he takes on the personality of whoever owns him.
Yeah.
Like I have to say, just growing up with my dad, like there were times where normally, instead of cursing, he would change it to like, God bless America or something like that. But occasionally he did slip, just not realizing that, I was there. Or just not thinking about it. So it's very possible that something like that happened with McCoy, where he just didn't realize Harry was there, and for Harry this is just a cool curse word now.
And up until this point, nobody's wanted to tell him, because if you picked up a phrase like that and you didn't know it was significant, then being told it was significant would do more damage than just not mentioning it to you would.
Especially because very few people would be aware of how significant it was.
Right. Yeah.
I could see Harry using it on like around some white council members, and Ebenezer just sort of like just finger over his lips.
Someone is like, someone asked McCoy, where did he pick that up? I have no idea. I'd never use that phrase so casually. Terrible.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because I don't think anyone else really uses it.
Let's see.
I did find it odd that there was no mention of Bonnie in the scenes with Dresden's family.
What was okay, wait. Which scenes would that be?
The scene at the very end where he's with Maggie and Mouse. He's at the Carpenters. He's brought Molly there, and he's thinking that this is my family. I just it was slightly odd that he didn't mention Bonnie there, or in the scene fighting with Ethnia when he was thinking about them, because we saw her earlier today in finger quotes. We saw her in peace talks, and I don't think she's a secret. So I don't know.
Also, no mention in Christmas Story.
Good point. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what to make of it. I mean,
now,
it could just be an oversight, but this is also Jim Butcher, so I don't want to bet on that right away.
Well, also, so whenever Mab was sending out the like negative energy, Bob mentioned that he's sort of on the enemy list, and I don't know how much Mab would know about Bonnie. Like that might.
So Mab definitely knows about Bonnie.
Okay,
because she was Bonnie. It was okay. We didn't know who she was, but Bonnie, Demon Reach, and Mab were cooperating to keep Harry alive.
Okay. You see, this is why I like talking with y'all. I read most of these as they came out. And I haven't had it like I started rereading some of the older ones, but I still have a lot to work through before I reread these. Whereas with y'all, I just mentioned something and y'all just be like, oh no, this is what it is. It's like, great.
Yeah, I first read these books, I think 2018. So it's it's all relatively fresh for me.
Yeah, I started reading Small Favor. It was actually the first one I read just to see if I cared about the series. And then I read up to those. So I think I started reading in like 2009. And since then, it's just been as they come out.
Okay, yeah. So that's a long time to retain this sort of detail.
Well, especially you look at this, like I'm looking at a list of when the books came out. And so from 2000 to, 2009, that's 11 books. And then for the second decade, it's like 6 of them, 2 of them this year.
Well, so there was a huge gap between Skin Game and Peace Talks, I think. I think that's most of what did it.
Correct. Before that, it's pretty much one a year. Then Cold Days to Skin Game, it's 2 years. And then Skin Game to Peace Talks, it's about 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. Hopefully he gets back on the once per year schedule then. That would be I would love to follow this in real time and have these talks once a year with you guys.
That would be great. I think it was early on that was like his main series, and that was most of what he was doing. And he sort of branched out since then. So now he's focused in a bunch of different areas.
Yeah, I'm not blaming him, but now that he's sort of back on it, it did seem like he was taking a break from the series and not just from not just as a consequence of being busy. So I'm hoping that now that he's gotten these, that he's good to go.
Right. Especially like one of the first things I was talking about. Now there's a status quo that things can sort of go to. Hopefully that'll speed things up, because so far, like most of the books since changes, like with changes, you have a huge change. Then, like I said, like the rest of them are all something very different and a lot of things in flux.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now some of those relationships have been sort of taken form in a stable way. So now hopefully he has the framework he could work within.
Yeah, one can hope.
Okay, so in terms of like big moments from the book, whereas what was it? Relatively late in the big battle, they've been fighting and they're hearing this the Jotun horn from off in the south. And they hear this several times and they're in the middle of this fight. And then it finally, comes right up on them, and they find out that it's River Shoulders, with the Jotun horn, and he's leading, Marcone and Ivy and some of the forces of the White Council, and that moment actually reminded me a lot of which it's been too long. I'll need to pick those up again soon. The Fellowship of the Ring. Well, the Lord of the Rings in the Return of the King, because they do it a little differently in the movies, but in the books, they see the boats with the black sails, coming up the river, and it's like, well, those are Sauron's reinforcements, and we were already on the ropes. I guess it's all over. And then,
and then it's actually reinforcements.
Right. And so it seems very much like that kind of moment, where, what's his term? Tolkien's term, eucatastrophe. Go ahead.
So I can only think of like one more thing that I had thought of, and I realize there's like no chance this would ever happen, but I just want to see like a short story in like the distant future, with like ridiculously high technology and everything, and then Murphy and Hendrix just kicking ass.
Did they take? Yeah, they took Hendrix too.
Yes.
Well, that actually reminds me of another point I had noted here. When where is it here? When Harry brings Murphy's body to Mab's army, and Mab says, "She has shared our enemies and earned our respect, and so it shall be known amongst my vassals and to the furthest reaches of my kingdom."
Oh boy! So, well, does memory count only? I think that counts only mortals.
I think so.
Well, yeah. Okay. I wasn't thinking about that, but yeah, that is a thing. But the other thing with that is like it kind of makes me mad, and this is a thing I've been on about at various points for a while, because our culture is really bad at doing that, and
Mhm.
I think that is a sign of sickness in our culture. And this is an example I've gone to a few times now, like Audie Murphy, the most decorated U.S. soldier of World War II, like had pretty much every medal that the U.S. can give, and several from like Allied forces, from the British and from the French. Um, and I never heard of this guy until until I heard a song by a Swedish heavy metal band about him. And it's like, we have a formal education system in this country. They teach history classes. It's like, if you don't pass on that kind of thing, what is the point of your history class? And like, there's several others, of a similar. Alvin York is another, and like, there's several others I've found out incidentally, about incidentally through similar ways, and it's like, what are we doing?
Part of it, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. Well, part of it is that we need those people to become Valkyries sooner rather than later, and so you're really screwing things up by reminding us all that they exist. But I think the more serious thing is that if you think about in 1 year in this country experiences roughly 150 million years of history. If you think about people's waking hours and the population and so forth, every every second that passes is years of things happening, and everybody has interesting stories, and it's simply never going to be possible to tell all those stories. And so, as a culture, we have to decide which ones to prioritize, which ones not to prioritize, and that's where the vulnerability comes in. But I don't think it requires malevolence. I don't even think it requires negligence. There's simply so many stories out there that we we could never know them all. No matter what we do, we're going to be forgetting about people who did incredible things. And that's just all there is to it.
And to
Yeah.
well to piggyback on that point, I think as a culture we make sure those people are remembered by pretty much designating, okay, you're the World War II expert. So you're going to be the one, like in a university, teaching this or writing books about this. So it's kind of like whenever you study that, it's like, okay, you're the one responsible for remembering this group of people.
And that's not to say that there aren't problems. That's not to say that there aren't people who we should know and who we should be prioritizing. It's simply to say that no matter how we do it, we're going to be missing people, and it's a matter of degree and not uh, a qualitative difference.
Yeah, I, but like, I look at some of the people who are okay. Yeah, I don't know. Um,
I'm not disagreeing with you about those stories in particular. Just to clarify, I think it's a shame that they aren't more widely known. But history, it's not. What's a good analogy? It's not an inverted pyramid that's resting on a point. History was bigger than we are now. There's more of history than there is of present day stuff. And we don't, it's impossible for anybody to even fully keep up with present day stuff. You don't, for everything that happened now, there's a whole story behind it. There's a history. How did it get the way it is? Where did it come from? What did it overcome in order to be where it It is what faded out to let it take its place. Everything there, we're at the tip of a pyramid, and history is the rest of the pyramid. And yeah, it's a shame that we lose people like Audie Murphy, and we should try to remind people of him. But we're going to be losing somebody, and I think if we don't realize that, then we're going to be addressing the wrong problems, or we're going to be fighting a Sisyphean battle.
Well, and also if you're a teacher and you have only like so many days, like less than an hour a day to teach, okay, well now we're on World War II, you're going to be leaving out a lot of important stuff. So I guess you just kind of have to try to hit the main like global things, the things that, you know, address the US's involvement like as a whole, and just hope the students are interested in it enough to pursue further study on their own.
And you could argue that that's a philosophical mistake, that students would be more interested in hearing the personal stories and getting the background through them and not the other way around. And I think you could make that argument, but
See, I think in particular for young men, okay, if
yes,
you want to get young men interested in history, like, it's not that hard. You tell them stories of, badass heroes in desperate struggles. And they look at that and they're like, that's pretty cool. Tell me more about that. And then you fill in out from there.
right.
Yep. That's a great way to do it.
There is a soldier in World War II who I only knew about really because of a meme I saw on Tumblr of all places. An animated GIF somebody had made. So I don't know if you're familiar with the bears, I think they are. And every line of text that these bears speak is always misspelled. Well, that was the genre. But it was a story. There was a soldier in the Norwegian army, I think, who was separated from his platoon, who was in the middle of the mountains, and he had the platoon supply of amphetamines. And he was found 2 weeks later. He had managed to kill like every opposing soldier in his path, uh, stayed alive, rescued a bunch of people. He'd lost 25 pounds. The picture that they have of him afterwards, his eyes are as more widely open than you think human eyes can be. It's remarkable. I'll have to send it to you if I can ever find it again.
So, let's see. My line often in these talks. So to get back to the story, which I'm not objecting. This happens all the time. Where is that? So, so one interesting thing I caught. We've been talking a fair bit about calls back, but there is this moment that's a call forward to the Christmas story. And I think it's kind of interesting. Again, it's part of the wrap up. Harry is talking about them setting right, the people who were hurt.
Yeah,
and
and
he says,
Molly did do it.
well, but the interesting thing, he says, I'm not asking. My fealty is a two-way street. I have gone above and beyond my duty to Winter, right in front of God and everybody, by doing what no one else could. Now Winter will respond in kind by helping as no one else can. You will help them, every one of them. Do it in secret. No connections. We've interfered in their lives enough. This will happen. And Molly responds, already you have bound a Titan and now a queen. And just to be a nitpicky little jerk about this, Molly still owes Harry a Christmas present.
Oh, because you don't think that counted?
That wasn't a present. But the other thing near the end of this book, it's a kind of Harry had tied up, has sunk Ethniu, um, and she's bound on the island. And he says, Ethnia was my prisoner. I could extract service from her. It would be tricky and treacherous as hell, but wizards had done it before with beings of tremendous supernatural power. It was possible, just massively, massively unwise. Um, and I'm pretty sure. Well, I don't know if either of you have read this. Do either of you know The Empire of the East by Fred Saberhagen?
I know Fred Saberhagen. I have not read that book. I've
Okay,
only read his Berserker stories.
Yeah, I've read some of the Swords ones and I think the Dracula tapes, but that's all.
Right. So yeah, in The Empire of the East, it's actually a trilogy. And when you get to the last book, you find out that like this enormous this powerful empire of led by a dark wizard. It's actually powered by a like their greatest magic is powered by a demon that they manage to capture and bind basically. And then late in at one point in the book, what is it? Someone is stupidly persuaded to poke at him, or to use him in a way he wasn't really authorized to, or to use his power when he shouldn't have been. And then a little bit later they're like, look, we need to wake him up, we need him actually active. And they're like, well, can we keep him bound? And they're like, I think we can, but the other person had been fiddling around in a way that they weren't supposed to, and he gets loose again, which is pretty important to the plot of the book. Those are an interesting set of books. Although it does fall prey to, I think, Fred Saberhagen's usual problems. He's really good at creating interesting stories and interesting like magic and setups like that. Terrible at creating interesting characters. But let's see. We're closing in on 2 hours.
There was a lot to talk about in this book.
Yeah. So,
we didn't even touch on Dracul, just because I thought that was he's been hinted at every now and then. I thought his entrance was about as good as it was going to be. I thought it was very interesting character. I think he's definitely going to come back to bite Harry later on. Like, this is not, whatever's going on there is not over yet.
Well, and the other thing with that is, okay, let's see. Chandler was sucked into someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And he might be dead, or he might not be. And then two of the was it Wild Bill and Yoshimo?
Correct.
Were both killed, and Ramirez and Harry were both worried that they might be seeing them again. And so that's going to be another thing to watch out for in upcoming books too.
I mean, I know that one of the upcoming books is supposed to be called Mirror Mirror. And I don't know exactly what that book's going to be, but the fact that Black Court vampires traditionally can't be seen in mirrors doesn't feel like a coincidence to me. So we will find out, I'm sure.
Okay, so Chris, did you have any big points you wanted to cover before we close out?
I think we covered them all.
Harry, how about you?
I think this book was better than Peace Talks, all things considered. Not just the events and the plot, but I think the writing was an improvement, and I was very happy to see that.
Yeah, I would not disagree with that. Okay, well, then thank you both for joining me tonight, and to anyone listening to this who has listened to the whole thing, thank you. I hope you've found these interesting as well.
Don't forget to like,
And
share, and subscribe. I think is what the cool kids are saying these days.
I try to avoid saying like if everyone is saying it, you may as well not, because it's people don't even hear it.
Hmm.
Is the thing. Um, something I learned from someone who does advertising for a living. Um, okay. Um, all right. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining me, and you guys have a good night.
Have a
Good
good
night.